Sir Francis Drake was a man whose name echoed through the halls of history, both as a daring explorer and a fierce privateer. His legendary circumnavigation of the globe, defying the might of the Spanish Empire, cemented his status as one of the most fascinating figures of the Elizabethan age. Yet behind his celebrated exploits lies a complex legacy, one filled with adventure, triumph, and moral ambiguity. From the creaking decks of his iconic ship, the Golden Hind, to the turbulent waters of the Caribbean and beyond, Drake's story is as captivating as it is controversial, shaping the world in ways still felt today. In the vast chronicles of maritime history, few figures loom as large or as complex as Sir Francis Drake. Lauded by his countrymen as a daring explorer and naval hero, and reviled by his enemies as a pirate and plunderer, Drake's legacy has long straddled the line between national legend and imperial menace. Sir Francis Drake matters not only because of his accomplishments, but because of what he represents. In a world that was being rapidly reshaped by naval exploration, European rivalry, and mercantile ambitions, Drake was at the center of it all. Born around 1540 into a modest Protestant family in Devon, Drake rose to become one of the most famous figures in Elizabethan England. His exploits at sea earned him riches, fame, and knighthood from Queen Elizabeth I. In 1580, he became the first Englishman to circumnavigate the globe, following in the footsteps of Ferdinand Magellan and projecting English power into new and uncharted territories. But Drake was more than just a skilled navigator. He was a key player in the expansion of English influence and in the rise of England as a formidable maritime power. Drake's most pivotal moment came in 1588, when he served as vice admiral in the defeat of the Spanish Armada, an event that would not only secure England's survival but also shift the balance of power in Europe. By humiliating the mighty Spanish fleet, Drake helped bring about the decline of Spain's dominance over the seas and paved the way for the rise of British naval supremacy. Yet Drake's role was not without controversy. He was deeply involved in the early transatlantic slave trade, participated in the plundering of Spanish and Portuguese territories, and operated in a gray zone between patriotism and piracy. These elements of his story, too often glossed over in traditional histories, are vital to understanding the real Sir Francis Drake, not just as an individual, but as a product and agent of his times. In this sense, Drake's life offers a window into a transformative era. His voyages connected continents, disrupted empires, and catalyzed events whose consequences we still feel today. To study Drake is to study the dawn of globalization, the mechanics of empire, and the dual faces of exploration, discovery and domination. At the heart of Drake's story is exploration, not just geographical but also political and ideological. The late 16th century was a time when vast areas of the globe were still uncharted by Europeans, and the hunger for new trade routes, resources, and territorial claims drove men like Drake to the ends of the earth. Drake's circumnavigation was a defining moment in the age of exploration. It was a voyage filled with danger, mutiny, discovery, and immense reward. By sailing the Pacific coast of the Americas and crossing into the Indian Ocean, Drake helped redraw the map for English ambitions and established new pathways for maritime expansion. Exploration, in Drake's case, was also tied to intelligence gathering and espionage. Many of his missions were not merely adventurous, they were acts of geopolitical strategy. His knowledge of enemy ports, currents, and coastlines made him invaluable to Queen Elizabeth's court. Sir Francis Drake was both celebrated and condemned as a pirate, depending on who told the story. To the Spanish, he was El Drac, the Dragon, a criminal and menace whose raids devastated New World colonies. To the English, he was a bold privateer, operating under royal license to strike at the enemies of the crown. This dual identity raises important questions about the nature of piracy and its legitimization by state power. Drake's most profitable ventures involved the plundering of Spanish ships and settlements, acts which today might be classified as maritime terrorism or grand larceny. Yet in Elizabethan England, these raids were hailed as patriotic triumphs. The documentary will explore how piracy was institutionalized under the guise of privateering, how it blurred ethical lines, and how it laid the groundwork for Britain's later imperial ventures. Drake's career illustrates the murky intersection of commerce, conquest, and state-sponsored violence. Drake's voyages were not just about exploration, they were acts of imperial assertion. By planting the English flag in distant lands, claiming territories, and securing loot from rival empires, Drake was advancing England's status as an imperial contender. Though the British Empire would not fully emerge until the 17th and 18th centuries, its seeds were sown in the 1500s. Drake, like his patron Queen Elizabeth, envisioned an England that could rival the vast holdings of Spain and Portugal. His actions helped create the myths and momentum that would sustain centuries of imperial expansion. Drake's legacy, therefore, must be understood in the context of colonialism. His encounters with indigenous peoples, his role in the slave trade, and his disruption of existing societies raised difficult but necessary questions about the cost of empire, for the colonized as well as the colonizers. In the centuries following his death, Drake was mythologized as a patriotic hero. Statues were erected in his honor. Schools and ships were named after him. He became a symbol of English naval pride, Protestant resilience, and maritime prowess. But in recent decades, Drake's reputation has come under scrutiny. Historians and activists alike have begun to revisit his role in the slave trade, his violent raids, and his complicity in colonial oppression. These reassessments are not about erasing history, but about confronting its full truth. This video does not seek to provide easy answers. Instead, it invites viewers into the complexity of the past, into a world where exploration could coexist with exploitation, and where heroism was often entangled with harm. Sir Francis Drake, a name forever etched into the annals of maritime history, did not spring from nobility or elite naval academies. His beginnings were modest, arguably even disadvantaged, shaped by the religious turmoil of the Reformation and the tumultuous socio-political landscape of 16th-century England. This chapter traces the origins of Drake's remarkable transformation from a farmer's son in Devon to one of the most daring and controversial figures to ever sail the high seas. Sir Francis Drake was born around the year 1540 in Tavistock, a small market town nestled in the rugged landscape of Devon, in southwest England. The exact date of his birth is uncertain, but most historians place it between 1540 and 1544. His birth coincided with a period of intense religious upheaval across England, where shifting allegiances between Catholicism and Protestantism shaped the social fabric of everyday life. Drake's family was of modest means. His father, Edmund Drake, was a tenant farmer or a small-scale yeoman, and later a lay preacher. The Drakes were part of the Protestant minority in Devon, a region where the old Catholic faith still held strong among the rural populace. As such, they often found themselves at odds with the local community and authorities. Although Drake was not born into wealth or nobility, he was born into a time of opportunity, especially for those willing to venture beyond England's shores. In many ways, his later rise exemplifies the kind of social mobility that the maritime world made possible. The sea in the 16th century was a realm of transformation, for goods, ideas, nations, and ambitious young men. In 1549, when Drake was still a child, a wave of religious violence swept through Devon and Cornwall during the Prayer Book Rebellion, a response to the imposition of the English-language Book of Common Prayer. As outspoken Protestants, the Drakes became targets of persecution. According to some accounts, they were forced to flee Tavistock and move to Kent, in southeast England. There, Edmund Drake found employment as a lay minister and later secured a position to preach to sailors in the naval dockyards of Chatham, along the River Medway. This move to a naval-centric environment would have a profound impact on the young Francis. Living among shipbuilders, sailors, and seafarers, he was exposed early on to nautical culture, tales of the sea, and the mechanics of ship life. It was in this crucible of religious reform and maritime energy that the boy who would become England's most famous sea captain began to take shape. The young Drake likely received basic education in literacy and religious instruction, enough to make him a competent reader and writer. But his true education came not from books, but from the decks of ships and the mouths of sailors. The sea, with its opportunities and dangers, called to him from a young age, and he would answer. Around the age of 12, Drake was apprenticed to a coastal trader who operated a small cargo bark that plied routes between England and the Low Countries. This early experience gave Drake hands-on training in navigation, ship maintenance, coastal piloting, and trade logistics. He learned to read wind patterns, interpret tides, and manage cargo. But more importantly, he learned the unpredictable nature of life at sea. After the death of his employer, the vessel was left to Drake, a remarkable early sign of the trust and competence he inspired even as a youth. However, it was his connection to the powerful Hawkins family, cousins from Plymouth, that would launch his maritime career to new heights. The Hawkins were experienced and well-connected merchants privateers, and shipbuilders. John Hawkins, in particular, was one of England's leading naval entrepreneurs and a key figure in early English attempts to break into the Atlantic trade. Under Hawkins' guidance, Drake was introduced to the realities of Atlantic voyaging, a world filled with high-stakes ventures, hostile powers, and immense profits. It was during his service aboard Hawkins's ships in the 1560s that Drake's career truly began to take off. These voyages often traveled to the coast of West Africa, the Canary Islands, and the Caribbean, regions that were central to the Spanish and Portuguese maritime empires. For England, these were dangerous waters, where Protestant sailors could be seized or killed by Catholic enemies. But they were also full of opportunity. One of the darkest aspects of Drake's early maritime experiences was his involvement in the transatlantic slave trade. As a member of John Hawkins's fleet, Drake participated in voyages that captured African people, either through trade with local African leaders or through outright raids, and transported them to Spanish colonies in the Americas for sale. These early expeditions were not only morally reprehensible, but politically volatile. Spain had formally banned foreign traders from participating in their colonial economies, particularly the asiento, slave trade contracts. Hawkins's slave voyages were thus viewed as criminal by Spain and were met with military resistance. Drake, however, saw these ventures as part of the maritime game of power and profit. He was reportedly deeply loyal to Hawkins, who referred to Drake as his trusty and well-beloved cousin. This loyalty would be tested in 1568, during a fateful voyage to the Spanish port of San Juan de Ulúa, in modern-day Mexico. There, English ships under Hawkins and Drake were ambushed by Spanish forces despite a temporary truce. Drake barely escaped with his life, and the experience would leave a lasting impact. It is widely believed that the betrayal at San Juan de Ulúa instilled in Drake a lifelong hatred of the Spanish, fueling his later raids and circumnavigation. More than just a commercial venture gone wrong, it was a formative moment of political awakening and personal vendetta. By his mid-20s, Drake had risen from apprentice to officer, gaining valuable experience in combat, logistics, and navigation. His time at sea had honed not only his technical skills, but also his leadership abilities. He was known among his peers for his confidence, cunning, and decisiveness, qualities that would serve him well in later naval engagements. Drake's early voyages taught him that success at sea required more than bravery. It required flexibility, diplomacy, espionage, and a deep understanding of both the natural world and human psychology. As an apprentice in a time of imperial competition, Drake learned that the seas were a battlefield, not only for goods and glory, but for national survival and ideological supremacy. These formative years were, in effect, Drake's university. They prepared him for the challenges of circumnavigating the globe, facing down the Spanish Armada, and shaping England's destiny. The lessons he absorbed during this time, from both triumph and failure, would define his conduct as an explorer, admiral, and imperial agent. Francis Drake's early life is a tale of resilience, adaptability, and ambition. From the religious strife that forced his family into exile to his apprenticeship under hardened seafarers and slave traders, Drake's character was forged in a crucible of conflict and opportunity. He emerged from his youth not merely as a sailor but as a strategist, diplomat, and warrior, a man molded by the sea, yet driven by the politics of his homeland. By the end of his 20s, Drake had witnessed the cruelty of empire, the betrayals of diplomacy, and the brutality of the slave trade. He had also glimpsed the vast potential of maritime power, the riches of the New World, and the vulnerabilities of even the mightiest empires. These insights would propel him into the next phase of his life, one where he would strike back at the Spanish, stake his claim as an explorer, and earn the favor of a queen. Before he was Sir Francis Drake, Vice Admiral and Knight, he was a boy from Devon, shaped by wind, wave, and war. It is only by understanding these roots that we can fully appreciate the complexity of the man who would one day sail around the world, and into legend. In the turbulent world of 16th-century maritime politics, few names stirred as much awe and resentment as Francis Drake. Though he would later be celebrated as an admiral, knight, and national hero, Drake's ascent truly began in the shadowy realm of privateering, a legal gray area between sanctioned warfare and outright piracy. This chapter explores how Drake, shaped by his early seafaring experiences, entered the volatile arena of privateering, where he would challenge the might of the Spanish Empire and begin building his reputation as England's most feared mariner. The story of Drake's rise cannot be told without examining the broader imperial rivalry that defined the Atlantic world. By the 1560s, Spain had established a vast and lucrative colonial empire in the Americas. Gold and silver flowed from the New World to Spain in massive treasure fleets, enriching the crown and funding wars across Europe. The English, still relatively new to long-range naval operations, viewed this wealth with envy, and many believed it should be shared if not outright seized. For a nation that was still struggling to assert itself on the global stage, privateering became both an economic lifeline and a strategic weapon. Drake's initial entry into this world occurred through his close association with the Hawkins family, particularly John Hawkins, a seasoned sea captain and merchant who had already begun to challenge Spanish dominance in the Caribbean. Between 1566 and 1568, Drake joined Hawkins on several voyages to the West Indies, including expeditions that would forever alter his view of the Spanish Empire and his place within it. These early voyages were driven by both profit and politics. Ostensibly, they involved the trade of goods with Spanish colonies, often in direct violation of Spain's laws prohibiting foreign merchants from trading in its territories. But beneath this mercantile veneer was a deeper strategy: to undermine Spain's monopoly over the Atlantic and gain a foothold for England in the wealth of the New World. It was during these years that Drake first experienced the sheer scale of Spanish colonial power. Fortresses bristling with cannons, cities pulsing with plundered wealth, and harbors guarded by men ready to kill intruders on sight. One of the most formative experiences of Drake's early privateering career occurred in 1568, when Hawkins's fleet, carrying both goods and enslaved Africans, entered the harbor of San Juan de Ulúa on the coast of present-day Mexico. The English, weary from a long voyage and battered by storms, sought refuge in supplies. Initially, they negotiated a truce with the Spanish authorities stationed at the port. A seemingly cordial agreement was made. The English would be allowed to rest and resupply, and in return, they would cause no disturbance. But what followed would forever burn itself into Drake's memory. The Spanish, under orders from the Viceroy of New Spain, launched a sudden and devastating attack on the anchored English ships. The harbor erupted in violence. English sailors were cut down, ships were destroyed, and many, including Hawkins, barely escaped with their lives. Drake himself managed to flee aboard one of the few surviving vessels, but the betrayal at San Juan de Ulúa left an indelible mark. It was not merely a loss of ships or men. It was a lesson in the cold-bloodedness of imperial conflict and the duplicity of diplomacy. From that moment on, Drake harbored a deep personal hatred for Spain, and it would fuel much of his ferocity in the years to come. After returning to England, Drake began to forge a path of his own. No longer content to serve under others, he started planning expeditions independently, aiming to strike at Spain's holdings in the Caribbean. These ventures, though unsanctioned at first, quickly caught the attention of Queen Elizabeth I and her closest advisors. England, under Elizabeth, was not officially at war with Spain. Open conflict would have been disastrous. But through a clever policy of plausible deniability, the Crown began to issue letters of marque, documents that effectively legalized piracy against specific enemy nations. This was the birth of what would become one of England's most effective maritime policies: privateering. The distinction between pirate and privateer may seem thin, but it was a crucial legal and moral distinction in the eyes of 16th-century Europe. Pirates acted without the sanction of any government and were considered criminals by all. Privateers, by contrast, operated under official commission, granted through royal letters of marque, that permitted them to attack enemy ships and ports during times of war or political hostility. Their plunder was split between the crew and their sovereign, and they were, at least in theory, subject to the rules of engagement. This legal fiction allowed Elizabeth to encourage attacks on Spanish commerce while maintaining a veneer of diplomacy. Drake was an ideal candidate for this new era of naval entrepreneurship. Charismatic, daring, and deeply ambitious, he also had the political savvy to understand the delicate balance between national interest and personal gain. In 1572, with unofficial backing from the Crown and a letter of marque in hand, Drake launched what would become his first major independent expedition to the Spanish Main. His objective was clear: to strike Spanish shipping routes and capture as much treasure as possible. Operating from secret bases in the Caribbean, he and his crew launched lightning raids on coastal settlements and ambushed mule trains laden with silver. One of the most successful operations from this period was the daring attack on Nombre de Dios, a key port in Panama through which Spanish treasure was transported. Though wounded during the assault, Drake managed to seize substantial loot and, more importantly, demonstrate that the mighty Spanish Empire was vulnerable. The raid sent shockwaves through both London and Madrid. In England, he was hailed as a bold patriot. In Spain, he became known as a villainous pirate, earning the moniker El Drac, or the Dragon. Drake's exploits in the Caribbean cemented his reputation as a rising star in English naval circles. But beyond the gold and glory, these raids had broader implications. They challenged Spain's illusion of total control over the Americas and encouraged other European powers to reconsider their roles in global exploration and conquest. For England, Drake was not merely a thief. He was a tool of empire, a man who could deliver wealth and weaken their most powerful rival. The Crown's support of privateering was not accidental, it was a calculated strategy. Elizabeth's England was, in many ways, still a fragile state. Economically and militarily inferior to Spain, it could not afford direct confrontation. Privateering offered a low-cost, high-reward method of striking at the heart of Spanish dominance. Moreover, it allowed Elizabeth to enrich her court and navy without draining the royal treasury. Privateers like Drake operated as quasi-independent contractors, risking their own fortunes for potentially enormous rewards, while simultaneously advancing England's geopolitical ambition. By the late 1570s, privateering had become a cornerstone of England's maritime strategy. Dozens of captains, inspired by Drake's success, sought their own letters of marque and took to the seas. But Drake remained in a league of his own, both for the scale of his operations and his knack for combining military daring with public spectacle. He understood that his actions were not merely for his crew or his queen. They were for the people of England, whose support could turn a sailor into a legend. It is important to remember, however, that Drake's actions were deeply controversial, both in his own time and today. To the Spanish, he was nothing less than a terrorist, a rogue who slaughtered civilians and plundered without conscience. Even within England, some questioned the morality of attacking colonies and enslaving native peoples. But for the English crown, desperate to assert itself on the world stage, men like Drake were indispensable. The 1568 betrayal at San Juan de Ulúa had taught Drake that legal norms and treaties meant little in the face of imperial ambition. He came to see himself as an instrument of providence, a chosen figure ordained to challenge tyranny and champion England's cause. This sense of divine mission, whether sincere or performative, would underpin much of his later career. By the time Drake returned from his Caribbean ventures, he had amassed considerable wealth and political capital. He was no longer simply a sea captain, he was a national asset. The Queen rewarded him not with formal titles just yet, but with her favor, and in Elizabethan England, that was worth more than any crown of gold. His successes emboldened the court, enriched the economy, and laid the foundation for England's eventual transformation into a global naval power. In retrospect, Drake's privateering phase was not just about raids and riches. It was a training ground, a proving arena where he honed his tactical genius, tested the limits of royal backing, and demonstrated the vulnerability of the Spanish Empire. It also revealed the shifting ethics of maritime warfare. The line between pirate and patriot blurred in the Elizabethan age, and Drake walked that line with audacity and cunning. His career as a privateer prepared him for even greater feats, circumnavigating the globe, fighting the Armada, and shaping the future of English imperialism. But it all began in the Caribbean, with blood, fire, and gold, and a young captain who refused to be forgotten. The story of Francis Drake's circumnavigation of the globe is one of the most audacious and consequential voyages in the history of exploration. Between 1577 and 1580, Drake not only achieved what only one other expedition had accomplished before, the complete navigation of the earth by sea, but he did so in defiance of one of the most powerful empires of the time, Spain. His journey was not merely a feat of navigation. It was a political maneuver, a piratical crusade, and a test of human will and leadership that catapulted him into legendary status and permanently altered the course of English imperial ambition. The genesis of the voyage was as political as it was exploratory. England in the late 16th century was a rising Protestant power surrounded by Catholic hostility, with Spain, the world's preeminent empire, as its greatest rival. Tensions had been simmering for years, exacerbated by England's support of Protestant rebels in the Spanish Netherlands and its aggressive maritime incursions into Spanish-dominated waters. Queen Elizabeth I, ever the cautious strategist, was not ready to declare open war with Spain, but she was determined to undermine its dominance by less direct means. Privateering, espionage, and covert operations offered her the tools to achieve these goals while preserving diplomatic ambiguity. Drake had already earned a reputation as a formidable seafarer and privateer through his earlier Caribbean raids. His familiarity with Spanish defenses, shipping routes, and colonial weaknesses made him an ideal candidate for a more ambitious mission, one that would take him beyond the known world. Though officially described as a voyage of exploration to find new trade routes and expand English knowledge of the globe, the mission was secretly designed to raid Spanish settlements and treasure fleets along the Pacific coast of the Americas, where Spain had assumed its colonies were safe from attack. Elizabeth herself reportedly gave Drake sealed orders to be opened only after departure, granting him considerable discretion in how he conducted the mission. It was a gamble, but one the Queen believed could deliver extraordinary results. In December 1577, Drake set sail from Plymouth with a fleet of 5 ships: the Pelican, later renamed the Golden Hind, the Elizabeth, the Marigold, the Swan, and the Benedict. The expedition's public purpose was cloaked in the language of discovery and commerce, but its real objectives were understood by those closest to the Queen's inner circle. The fleet was modest in size, but well-armed and stocked with provisions for a long and perilous journey. Among the crew were sailors, gunners, navigators, and even a few gentlemen adventurers seeking fame and fortune. From the outset, the voyage was fraught with challenges. As the fleet made its way down the coast of West Africa and then across the Atlantic to South America, it faced storms, disease, and descent. By the time Drake reached the Strait of Magellan, the narrow, treacherous passage between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans at the tip of South America, his fleet had already been diminished by weather and desertion. The strait itself proved to be one of the most dangerous stretches of the voyage. Fierce storms battered the ships, and the fleet was scattered. Only the Golden Hind, captained by Drake himself, made it through into the Pacific. The Elizabeth turned back, and the Marigold was lost, likely to a combination of weather and wreckage. Drake was now alone in unknown waters, cut off from resupply, and fully committed to the Pacific campaign. What followed was one of the most remarkable piratical rampages in history. Sailing north along the Pacific coast of South America, an area where Spanish colonies had grown rich under the assumption of geographic safety, Drake struck with precision and ruthlessness. He attacked port cities such as Valparaiso and Callao, looting warehouses, capturing merchant ships, and seizing Spanish gold and silver. His knowledge of Spanish shipping routes, gained during his earlier Caribbean ventures, proved invaluable. His crew, battle-hardened and driven by both survival and greed, executed raids with deadly efficiency. The most spectacular prize of the voyage came when Drake captured the Spanish galleon Nuestra Señora de la Concepción, mockingly referred to by the English as the Cacafuego. The ship was a floating treasure house, laden with immense quantities of silver, gold, jewels, and other valuable cargo bound for Panama. The value of the treasure Drake seized from the Cacafuego was staggering. Some estimates suggest it was equivalent to nearly half of England's annual revenue at the time. For Drake and his crew, the capture was both a financial windfall and a psychological triumph. It demonstrated that even Spain's most well-defended maritime assets were vulnerable to daring and well-planned attacks. With his ship now weighed down by treasure and his notoriety rapidly spreading across the Pacific, Drake faced a new challenge: how to get home. Returning the way he had come, through the Strait of Magellan, was too risky, especially given the possibility of Spanish pursuit. Instead, Drake turned his course westward, opting to complete the circumnavigation of the globe. His route took him across the vast Pacific Ocean, making landfall in a series of islands including the Philippines and the Moluccas, where he traded with local rulers and occasionally found refuge. These encounters, while less dramatic than his raids, were crucial for resupply and for the gathering of intelligence on local trade networks. In the Moluccas, for instance, Drake forged temporary alliances with sultans who welcomed an alternative to the Portuguese-Spanish stranglehold on regional trade. Drake's crossing of the Indian Ocean was grueling. The voyage passed through storms, extreme heat, and periods of near starvation. The Golden Hind narrowly avoided destruction on several coral reefs and had to undergo makeshift repairs on an uninhabited island. Yet the ship and its exhausted crew pressed on, rounding the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa and sailing up the Atlantic coast of the continent. Along the way, they encountered Portuguese vessels and colonial outposts, but Drake, ever wary of international scrutiny, avoided unnecessary engagements. In September 1580, after nearly 3 years at sea and more than 36,000 nautical miles traveled, Drake returned to England, anchoring in Plymouth Harbor. The Golden Hind, battered, barnacled, and burdened with loot, was the only ship of the original 5 to complete the journey. The return was a moment of national celebration. Word of Drake's exploits had already reached London, and his arrival was greeted as a triumph. The cargo he brought back included an astonishing haul of precious metals, spices, and exotic items, but perhaps more valuable was the message his voyage had sent: that England could challenge the Spanish Empire on the high seas and succeed. Queen Elizabeth, ever the master of image and politics, understood the power of Drake's accomplishment. In 1581, aboard the Golden Hind itself, she personally knighted him, a public endorsement that elevated Drake from privateer to national hero. The ceremony, held at Deptford on the River Thames, was attended by members of the court and foreign dignitaries. It was a spectacle meant to showcase not only Drake's valor, but also England's maritime ascension. By knighting a man whom the Spanish crown had branded a criminal and demanded extradition for, Elizabeth sent a clear signal. England would chart its own imperial path, unconstrained by Spanish intimidation. The decision to knight Drake was not without controversy. The Spanish ambassador in London lodged formal protests, calling the act a provocation and a reward for piracy. Diplomats in Madrid were outraged. They viewed Drake not as an explorer but as a thief and terrorist who had disrupted their trade, insulted their sovereignty, and endangered their colonial system. Yet for England, Drake's achievements were too valuable to disown. He had brought back not only treasure but also detailed maps, navigational knowledge, and strategic insights into Spanish operations. His circumnavigation proved that English ships could operate globally and that England, despite its modest resources compared to Spain, could become a naval power. Beyond the immediate political consequences, the impact of Drake's voyage reverberated throughout the Elizabethan imagination. He became a symbol of English daring, Protestant resilience, and imperial destiny. Writers and chroniclers celebrated him in verse and prose, and he was depicted in paintings clad in armor, surrounded by globes and charts, the embodiment of English ambition. Schools and ships would bear his name for centuries to come, and his voyage would inspire generations of explorers, pirates, and empire builders. Yet beneath the layers of national pride and heroic narrative lies a more complex legacy. Drake's voyage was marked not only by exploration and courage, but also by violence, greed, and exploitation. His attacks on Spanish settlements and ships often resulted in the deaths of civilians and the disruption of local economies. He took part in the slave trade earlier in his career, and his circumnavigation was driven as much by the pursuit of personal wealth as by patriotic or scientific motives. The glorification of his accomplishments sometimes obscures the suffering they caused and the imperial logic that underpinned them. Even so, it is impossible to deny the magnitude of what Drake achieved. His circumnavigation was a logistical and navigational marvel. It was conducted without modern instruments, across seas largely uncharted by English mariners, and under constant threat of mutiny, disease, and foreign retaliation. It pushed the boundaries of what was possible in 16th-century seafaring and expanded England's vision of its role in the world. His voyage marked the transition from a largely insular nation to one that would, in time, build the largest maritime empire in history. Drake returned from his circumnavigation a wealthy man, but his voyage brought more than personal fortune. It provided a roadmap, literal and figurative, for England's imperial future. In the decades that followed, English explorers, merchants, and colonists would venture further into Asia, Africa, and the Americas, often invoking Drake's legacy as a justification for their actions. The voyage had proved that England could reach any shore, challenge any power, and return victorious. The Golden Hind, Drake's flagship, was preserved as a national monument for many years after his return. Though it eventually rotted and was dismantled, it lived on in memory, a symbol of a time when the horizon seemed limitless and the world was England's for the taking. Drake himself continued to serve the crown in various naval campaigns, most notably in the conflict with the Spanish Armada, but it was his circumnavigation that secured his immortality. In the end, the voyage that began as a clandestine operation to raid Spanish gold ended up reshaping global geopolitics. It revealed the fragility of Spanish dominance, inspired a new wave of maritime enterprise, and announced England's arrival as a player on the world stage. Drake's journey around the globe was not just a feat of exploration. It was a declaration of intent, bold, brutal, and unforgettable. In the late 16th century, the geopolitical landscape of Europe was fraught with religious and imperial tensions. England, under the Protestant rule of Queen Elizabeth I, found itself increasingly at odds with Catholic Spain, led by King Philip II. The two nations were embroiled in a protracted conflict that was as much about religious supremacy as it was about control over trade routes and colonial. Philip II, a staunch Catholic, viewed Elizabeth's Protestant reign as illegitimate and her support for Protestant rebels in the Spanish Netherlands as a direct affront. The execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, in 1587 further exacerbated tensions, providing Philip with a pretext to invade England and restore Catholicism. To this end, he began assembling a formidable fleet, the Spanish Armada, intended to transport a massive invasion force across the English Channel. Aware of Spain's preparations, Elizabeth's advisors, including Sir Francis Walsingham, advocated for a preemptive strike to disrupt the impending invasion. Sir Francis Drake, already renowned for his daring exploits against Spanish interests, was entrusted with this critical mission. In April 1587, Drake set sail from Plymouth with a fleet of English ships. His target was the Spanish port of Cadiz, a crucial assembly point for the Armada. Upon arrival, Drake launched a surprise attack, catching the Spanish off guard. Over several days, he destroyed or captured numerous ships and vast quantities of supplies, significantly delaying Spain's invasion plans. This audacious raid, which Drake wryly referred to as singeing the King of Spain's beard, was a masterstroke of naval warfare, showcasing his strategic brilliance and dealing a substantial blow to Spanish morale and logistics. The following year, in 1588, the Spanish Armada, comprising over 130 ships and thousands of men, set sail for England. Drake was appointed Vice Admiral of the English fleet, serving under Lord Charles Howard of Effingham. The English navy, though smaller in number, boasted more maneuverable ships and experienced commanders. As the Armada approached the English Channel, the English fleet engaged in a series of skirmishes, utilizing their superior speed and firepower to harass the Spanish formation. Recognizing the need to break the Armada's tight crescent formation, Drake and Howard devised a plan to use fire ships, vessels set ablaze and sent drifting towards the anchored Spanish fleet near Calais. The ensuing chaos forced the Spanish ships to scatter, disrupting their formation and leaving them vulnerable to English attack. The decisive engagement occurred off the coast of Gravelines. The English fleet, capitalizing on the disarray, launched a ferocious assault. Drake's leadership and tactical acumen were instrumental in this battle, as the English ships inflicted significant damage on the Spanish fleet. The combination of relentless English attacks and adverse weather conditions compelled the battered Armada to retreat northward, circumnavigating the British Isles in a perilous journey back to Spain. Many ships were lost to storms and navigational errors, and the once mighty Armada returned home in tatters. The defeat of the Spanish Armada was a turning point in European history. It marked the decline of Spanish naval dominance and the emergence of England as a formidable maritime power. Drake's role in this victory solidified his status as a national hero and symbol of English resilience and ingenuity. Sir Francis Drake, celebrated as a pioneering navigator and national hero, also played a significant role in the early English involvement in the transatlantic slave trade. This aspect of his career, often overshadowed by his maritime achievements, has come under increased scrutiny in recent years. In the early 1560s, Drake participated in slave-trading expeditions alongside his cousin, Sir John Hawkins. These voyages involved the capture of Africans from the West African coast and their sale in the Spanish colonies of the Americas. One notable expedition in 1568 led to a confrontation with Spanish forces at San Juan de Ulúa, resulting in significant losses for the English fleet. Drake's involvement in these ventures was driven by economic motivations, as the slave trade promised substantial profits. Modern reappraisals of Drake's actions have led to a more critical examination of his legacy. While he remains a prominent figure in British history, there is a growing acknowledgement of the human cost associated with his participation in the slave trade. This has prompted discussions about how historical figures are commemorated and the importance of presenting a balanced view that includes both their achievements and their involvement in morally reprehensible activities. The reassessment of Drake's legacy reflects a broader trend in historical scholarship and public discourse, emphasizing the need to confront and understand the complexities of the past. By acknowledging the full scope of historical figures' actions, societies can engage in more informed and nuanced conversations about history and its lasting impacts. In 1579, during his circumnavigation of the globe, Sir Francis Drake landed on the Pacific coast of North America, in present-day California. Seeking a safe harbor to repair his ship, the Golden Hind, Drake and his crew came ashore and claimed the land for England, naming it Nova Albion. This act was significant, as it marked one of the earliest English claims on the western coast of the Americas. Drake's interactions with the indigenous peoples he encountered were notably different from many other European explorers of the time. Accounts suggest that he established friendly relations with the local tribes, engaging in exchanges and ceremonies that were marked by mutual respect. These encounters are often highlighted as examples of early diplomatic relations between Europeans and Native Americans. Beyond exploration, Drake's voyages contributed to English cartography and naval intelligence. The information gathered during his expeditions provided valuable insights into previously uncharted territories, aiding future navigation and colonial endeavors. His detailed observations and records enhanced England's understanding of global geography, which was crucial for expanding its maritime empire. Drake's claim of Nova Albion and his subsequent interactions with indigenous communities had lasting implications. They not only expanded England's territorial claims, but also set precedents for future engagements between European explorers and native populations. While his actions were driven by the imperial ambitions of the era, they also reflect the complexities of early cross-cultural encounters during the Age of Exploration. In the twilight of his illustrious career, Sir Francis Drake embarked on a series of expeditions that would ultimately culminate in failure and his untimely death. These final campaigns, marked by ambition and adversity, stand in stark contrast to the triumphs that had previously defined his legacy. In 1589, the year following the defeat of the Spanish Armada, Queen Elizabeth I authorized a counteroffensive aimed at capitalizing on Spain's weakened naval position. This endeavor, known as the English Armada or the Drake-Norris expedition, was led by Sir Francis Drake as admiral and Sir John Norris as general. The mission had three primary objectives: to destroy the remnants of the Spanish fleet, to incite a Portuguese uprising against Spanish rule by supporting the claimant Dom Antonio, and to seize Spanish treasure ships in the Azores. However, the expedition was plagued by poor planning, inadequate supplies, and disease. The English forces failed to capture Lisbon, and the anticipated Portuguese revolt did not materialize. The campaign ended in disaster, with significant loss of life and resources, and did little to diminish Spain's naval capabilities. Undeterred by this setback, Drake continued to seek opportunities to challenge Spanish dominance. In 1595, he joined forces with his cousin, Sir John Hawkins, for an expedition to the Caribbean. Their aim was to capture Spanish treasure and disrupt the flow of wealth from the New World to Spain. The expedition, however, was ill-fated from the outset. The English fleet faced fierce resistance, and both Hawkins and Drake fell ill during the voyage. Hawkins died off the coast of Puerto Rico, and Drake succumbed to dysentery on January 28, 1596, near Portobello, Panama. Honoring his request, he was buried at sea in full armor, a somber end to a storied life. Drake's final campaigns underscore the challenges of sustaining maritime supremacy and the perils of overreaching ambition. While his earlier exploits had brought him fame and fortune, these later endeavors serve as a reminder of the volatile nature of naval warfare and the limits of individual prowess in the face of formidable opposition and unforeseen circumstances. Sir Francis Drake's legacy is a tapestry woven with threads of heroism, controversy, and enduring influence. Celebrated as a national hero in Elizabethan England, Drake's exploits were instrumental in shaping the nation's maritime prowess and cultural identity. However, his actions also drew criticism, particularly from Spain and Catholic Europe, where he was viewed as a pirate and a symbol of Protestant aggression. Elizabethan propaganda played a significant role in constructing Drake's heroic image. The English crown, keen to bolster national morale and assert dominance over Spain, portrayed Drake's daring raids and circumnavigation as emblematic of English valor and divine favor. This narrative was disseminated through various mediums, including literature and official proclamations, reinforcing his status as a paragon of English virtue. Conversely, in Spain and Catholic Europe, Drake was vilified as a corsair and a threat to Catholic interests. His attacks on Spanish ports and ships were seen not as acts of heroism, but as unlawful aggression. This dichotomy in perception underscores the complex interplay between nationalistic propaganda and international relations during the era. Drake's maritime legacy is profound, influencing the development of the Royal Navy and naval warfare. His innovative tactics, such as the use of fire ships against the Spanish Armada, demonstrated a keen understanding of naval strategy and adaptability. These methods not only secured victories, but also set precedents for future naval engagements. Moreover, Drake's voyages contributed to advancements in navigation and cartography. His circumnavigation provided valuable data on global sea routes, aiding in the expansion of English trade and colonial ambitions. The knowledge gleaned from his expeditions laid the groundwork for England's emergence as a dominant maritime power. Culturally, Drake's legacy is immortalized through various memorials and representations. Statues erected in his honor, such as those in Plymouth and Tavistock, serve as tangible reminders of his impact. Literature and film have also perpetuated his legend, often romanticizing his exploits and embedding him within English folklore. However, modern perspectives have prompted a re-evaluation of Drake's legacy, particularly concerning his involvement in the slave trade and colonial exploitation. These aspects, once overlooked or minimized, are now integral to discussions about his historical impact. This shift reflects a broader societal effort to reconcile national pride with historical accountability. Sir Francis Drake's legacy is multifaceted, encompassing achievements in exploration, naval warfare, and national identity, while also inviting critical reflection on the ethical dimensions of his actions. His story exemplifies the complexities of historical figures whose contributions are both celebrated and scrutinized across time. Sir Francis Drake's legacy is a tapestry woven with threads of heroism, controversy, and enduring influence. Celebrated as a national hero in Elizabethan England, Drake's exploits were instrumental in shaping the nation's maritime prowess and cultural identity. However, his actions also drew criticism, particularly from Spain and Catholic Europe, where he was viewed as a pirate and a symbol of Protestant aggression. Elizabethan propaganda played a significant role in constructing Drake's heroic image. The English crown, keen to bolster national morale and assert dominance over Spain, portrayed Drake's daring raids and circumnavigation as emblematic of English valor and divine favor. This narrative was disseminated through various mediums, including literature and official proclamations, reinforcing his status as a paragon of English virtue. Conversely, in Spain and Catholic Europe, Drake was vilified as a corsair and a threat to Catholic interests. His attacks on Spanish ports and ships were seen not as acts of heroism, but as unlawful aggression. This dichotomy in perception underscores the complex interplay between nationalistic propaganda and international relations during the era. Drake's maritime legacy is profound, influencing the development of the Royal Navy and naval warfare. His innovative tactics, such as the use of fire ships against the Spanish Armada, demonstrated a keen understanding of naval strategy and adaptability. These methods not only secured victories, but also set precedents for future naval engagements. Moreover, Drake's voyages contributed to advancements in navigation and cartography. His circumnavigation provided valuable data on global sea routes, aiding in the expansion of English trade and colonial ambitions. The knowledge gleaned from his expeditions laid the groundwork for England's emergence as a dominant maritime power. Culturally, Drake's legacy is immortalized through various memorials and representations. Statues erected in his honor, such as those in Plymouth and Tavistock, serve as tangible reminders of his impact. Literature and film have also perpetuated his legend, often romanticizing his exploits and embedding him within English folklore. However, modern perspectives have prompted a re-evaluation of Drake's legacy, particularly concerning his involvement in the slave trade and colonial exploitation. These aspects, once overlooked or minimized, are now integral to discussions about his historical impact. This shift reflects a broader societal effort to reconcile national pride with historical accountability. Sir Francis Drake's legacy is multifaceted, encompassing achievements in exploration, naval warfare, and national identity, while also inviting critical reflection on the ethical dimensions of his actions. His story exemplifies the complexities of historical figures whose contributions are both celebrated and scrutinized across time. Sir Francis Drake's Golden Hind holds a unique place in the annals of maritime history, both as a symbol of his daring exploits and as a testament to the engineering prowess of the time. The ship was integral to his circumnavigation of the globe, a feat that elevated Drake's status as one of the most famous explorers and privateers of the 16th century. The ship itself, originally named the Pelican, was a small, relatively modest vessel compared to the grand ships of today, yet it became a legendary symbol of English defiance against the might of Spain. Its design was carefully suited to the demands of long voyages and piracy, with a combination of speed, agility, and the capacity to carry treasure and crew. The Golden Hind played a crucial role in allowing Drake to undertake such daring raids, including the raid on Spanish treasure ships and the capture of the Cacafuego, one of the largest captures of loot in history. The vessel was constructed as a merchant ship, but it was adapted for Drake's specific needs. Its most distinguishing feature was its ability to navigate the treacherous waters of the Strait of Magellan, an essential passage during the circumnavigation. The ship's design allowed for both defensive and offensive maneuvers, with a relatively light frame making it faster and more maneuverable than many of its contemporary counterparts. This maneuverability was crucial during the tense skirmishes with Spanish vessels, where speed and precision were necessary for success. The Golden Hind's role in Drake's global voyage cemented its place in history as more than just a ship. It became a symbol of English naval superiority and imperial ambition. However, like many vessels from this era, the Golden Hind's fate was not one of immortality. After completing the circumnavigation, the ship was returned to England, where it was displayed for its accomplishments. It was eventually broken up in 1630, after years of serving as both a royal symbol and a popular curiosity. The ship was not preserved in its original form, and no remnants of it exist today. Over the centuries, the Golden Hind has become a legend, its existence subject to the whims of historical memory and myth. Its original journey was a crucial chapter in England's rise as a maritime power, but the ship itself, unlike Drake's legacy, was not to endure. In the modern era, however, efforts have been made to recreate the Golden Hind as a means of preserving its historical significance. Several replicas of the ship have been constructed, with the most famous being one that is docked in London. This modern-day replica serves both as a tourist attraction and an educational tool. Visitors can walk through the replica and learn about the history of Drake's voyage, as well as the technological advancements in shipbuilding that made such expeditions possible. These replicas are more than just attractions. They act as tangible connections to the past, allowing people to experience firsthand the environment in which Drake and his crew would have lived and worked. The Golden Hind serves as a direct link to the era of exploration and the aggressive pursuit of colonial dominance, enabling future generations to better understand the challenges and triumphs of these early navigators. The ship's replicas also play a role in the broader cultural tourism and historical preservation efforts that aim to keep the legacies of maritime explorers like Drake alive. The story of Drake's circumnavigation and the Golden Hind's role in it is one of triumph, courage, and audacity, qualities that are celebrated in many cultures today. The ship's presence in museums and historical sites ensures that Drake's story is not just one of English history, but one that is shared globally. By visiting such sites, individuals can engage with the complex and multifaceted history of exploration, colonialism, and empire building. In this way, the ship becomes a powerful symbol not only of English achievement, but of the broader impacts of maritime exploration on the world's geopolitical landscape. In addition to its physical replicas, the Golden Hind's legacy is preserved in a wealth of artwork and literature that has depicted its voyages and those of its captain. From the grandiose paintings of Drake and his ship in full sail to modern films and documentaries that retell the story of his circumnavigation, the Golden Hind has been immortalized in various forms of media. These artistic representations are an essential part of Drake's enduring legacy, offering diverse perspectives on his character, the challenges of his time, and the significance of his achievements. However, as with many historical figures, Drake's legacy is far from uncontroversial. His actions, particularly his role in privateering, his involvement in the slave trade, and his colonial ambitions, have led to ongoing debates about how he should be remembered. While many in Britain and other parts of the English-speaking world view him as a hero, a bold adventurer who brought glory to his nation and helped establish English dominance on the seas, others, particularly in the former colonies he helped to subjugate, see him in a much more critical light. His exploits, while contributing to the expansion of the British Empire, were also responsible for the displacement and suffering of countless indigenous peoples and the spread of colonial oppression. As modern historians and activists seek to reassess figures like Drake, their legacies are often placed under new scrutiny. In particular, Drake's involvement in the transatlantic slave trade, including his participation in the capture and transport of enslaved Africans, is an aspect of his history that has gained more attention in recent years. These darker aspects of his career complicate the image of the intrepid explorer and raise important questions about the costs of empire building. This reassessment of Drake's legacy is not an attempt to erase his accomplishments, but rather to offer a more nuanced understanding of his impact on the world. Ultimately, the Golden Hind remains an important artifact in understanding the man behind the myths. It serves as both a symbol of his triumphs and a reminder of the complexities of the era in which he lived. While the ship no longer exists in its original form, its spirit lives on in the replicas and the ongoing discussion of Drake's role in world history. The ship and its captain's legacy have evolved over time, shaped by changing perceptions of exploration, colonialism, and national identity. As we continue to look back on Drake's voyages, we must remember that the legacy of any historical figure is never a singular story. It is a tapestry woven from achievements, controversies, and the ever-evolving narrative of how we choose